With my reviews of the second season complete, it's time for a more general look at the season. A lot of change happened at the start with our first change of companion, as well as a change to the script editor, switching from David Whittaker to Dennis Spooner. This season is a great follow-up to the first, with old and new faces taking up both writing and directional roles, with notable faces including Douglas Camfield and Dudley Simpson making their first marks on the show. But let's get on to the serials. As with last time, I'll give a general overview of my thoughts before ranking them. The season opened with Planet of Giants, a serial from the first production block, which was held back but still serves as a relatively good opening. While not the most amazing of serials, it does have a sense of beginning something, while finally using the idea of shrinking the quartet, which have been floating around the production office since the original ideas for An Unearthly Child. I don't want to imagine how bad it could have been if it hadn't been edited down to 3 episodes. But the serial as it stands is fine. The Dalek invasion of Earth sees the big return of the Daleks and the first departure of a companion. While plot-wise it's a bit of a retread of the Daleks, with its overall plot having similar elements, but retooled to work in a different environment, it's the perfect follow-up to the Daleks, but its ending may upstage the entire serial due to how memorable it is. The Rescue gives us the first new companion, in the form of Vicky. The serial is simple and short, with plenty of strong character work as to be expected of Whittaker, with a final twist, which so long as you aren't too familiar with Ray Barrett's vocal abilities, is great. The Romans was a dramatic change to the formula, with a farcical comedy, mixing the historical with a different format, which you wouldn't think would work together, but does. It tried something new, and while lacking on the historical side, it may be a more Marmite serial than previous ones, but I think it's a great watch in the moment, which will stick with you. The Web Planet was over-ambition to the extreme, a serial which bit off far more than it could chew with basically nothing redeemable about it. It just goes on and on and on, with very little happening, causing it to be perhaps the worst serial of the season, and the show so far. But at least it doesn't get your hopes up too high in episode 1 before becoming a letdown later. The Crusade, while lacking in plot, has some of the best dialogue in the series so far. There are some unfortunate casting decisions of its time, but the depictions of its characters is far more in depth than most of its time. It's got incredible performances plus really strong direction from one of the show's greatest in its first full serial. So long as you can get over the casting, it's a must-watch historical. The Space Museum is a lot like An Unearthly Child, with it having an incredibly strong opening episode, but then falls apart in the following 3. It gives us a very interesting idea with some nice dialogue before becoming a very generic and formulaic serial. It's very dull, with it not even being bad enough to enjoy ironically. The chase takes the Daleks into the world of comedy, lessening them as threats with them being used to deliver jokes which don't land as intended. It's full to bursting with interesting ideas which could have been better executed in their own serials, but instead are just a minor part of a relatively lacklustre Dalek adventure which wears its production issues on its sleeves. It does feature the departure of 2 companions, but that doesn't save the serial. The Time Meddler ended the series on a high, introducing a new companion while simultaneously giving us someone from the Doctor's own time and place, giving us an insight into who he might be. It's disguised as a historical, but the serial quickly becomes the first pseudo-historical. While it does slow a bit in the middle, the dialogue is on point and subverts the audience's expectations incredibly. But like with other serials, knowing the overall title does take away from the twists. To rank these serials from worst to best, in last place we have a tie between the Web Planet and the Space Museum, then Planet of Giants, The Chase, The Romans, the Dalek Invasion of Earth, The Crusade, The Rescue, with the top spot being taken by the Time Meddler. Looking at the characters, we have a few more to talk about than last season. We'll start with Susan due to her short time in this season. Due to this limited time, there's not much chance for Susan to develop as a character, which combined with her serials being a part of the first production block, means there wasn't much cause for her to change. While I will say that she isn't as screamy as she was last season, there's not much to say about her. Her departure is great and an incredibly iconic moment, but the serial's build-up was somewhat limited. Like with the first season, Ian's mostly static. There isn't too much to say about him, other than he is definitely closer with the Doctor than before. With him being separated from the others for most of the Romans, it does allow him to show off his independence, but that's nothing too new. He does take a bit of a backseat to the Doctor at times, who is far more likely to actually want to help rather than just leave. The Web Planet is definitely his weakest serial due to him basically disappearing halfway through to do nothing. But I can't talk about Ian without mentioning his knighthood, with him becoming a Knight of Jaffa in the Crusade. Barbara is as great as ever, keeping up her murderous streak established in the Keys of Marinus. Her dynamic with the Doctor is as great as it was in the previous season, but now we have her dynamic with Vicky. This dynamic basically being Vicky calling Barbara old and stupid. The two of them aren't often paired up, but when they are, Vicky tends to get on Barbara's nerves, perhaps as revenge for her murder of Sandy. Her dynamic with Ian doesn't change all that much, if at all, possibly due to Ian's static nature or simply because they just knew each other so well before being kidnapped. Their final moments in the chase are great, with them back in London 1965. They have a unique connection after their travels, getting to see this small insight into this really rounds them out at the end. As a newcomer, there's a lot to talk about with Vicky. I've already mentioned her dynamic with Barbara, but her dynamic with the Doctor is also great. Being a replacement for Susan, she has a far more interesting dynamic with the Doctor than Susan. Vicky is far less screamy than her predecessor, allowing her to be more confident, or at least appear so. Being from the far future, she has a greater knowledge of both history and science than the other companions, making her the second smartest despite her age. This does somewhat hinder the show, as the characters don't have to explain things to her, which is probably why The Crusade was a far less educational historical than it should have been. With her dynamic with the Doctor, we see the granddaughterly sort of role that Susan had, but the writing is a far lot stronger here. The Romans is especially strong in this regard, with the two spending the entire serial together, allowing them to have many moments between them. Vicky is a lot stronger of a character than Susan was. I don't want to talk too much about Stephen, as he's only been in one full serial, but he's definitely interesting. He's not a one-to-one copy of Ian, but shares some of his traits, but being younger with far more experience in space travel means he has plenty of room for development, or at least be more dynamic than his more static predecessor. He makes a strong first impression with his late addition to the cast, leaving a lot of his potential untapped until the following season. The Doctor, on the other hand, has gone through a dramatic change since the first season. While the opening two serials do have the Doctor written in the same way due to the fact that they were holdovers, from The Rescue onwards the Doctor is different. He's still grumpy but far more approachable, with a lighter tone to him. No longer does the Doctor try and leave as soon as possible due to a lack of interest. Now he jumps into danger feet first. This begins with the Dalek invasion of Earth, where he's less reluctant to leave, but definitely against it once he knows the Daleks survived, deciding to stay and fight. This side to the Doctor is perhaps at its best in The Time Meddler, where he's dealing with a smaller threat, but one that hits harder due to it being one of his own people. He's a far more rounded character than he was previously, which significantly strengthens him going forwards, with him finally becoming the true main character. The season is significantly different from the previous one, with far fewer historical stories and a greater amount of humour, with two outright comedies, presumably due to Dennis Spooner taking over as script editor. It's a great season, which while it does have two terrible serials right in the middle, the format having generally shorter serials makes it an easier watch, with the longer ones having more impact. The evolution is clear, with historicals taking a backseat to the science fiction serials, which are trying to make creatures which can rival the Daleks in popularity, with the Zarbi and Mechanoids as the two main ones. The bar has again been set high for the next season.